There was a day when I believed my life was about to end. Not on a battlefield, not during a public speech, not while standing before cameras or military officers. It happened during one of the most uncertain periods of my life, when rumors of betrayal moved through the shadows, when threats arrived faster than answers, and when every sunrise seemed to bring a new warning. My name is Ibrahim Traoré. Many people know me as a soldier, others know me as the president of Burkina Faso, some see me as a symbol of resistance during difficult times in Africa. Yet behind every title, every uniform, and every responsibility, there is simply a man who has struggled with fear, disappointment, pressure, and questions about life. I have faced terrorism. I have faced political instability. I have faced criticism from friends and enemies alike. I have watched people place their hopes on my shoulders while others wished to see me fail. Through all of this, my faith became one of the few things that kept me standing. I do not claim to be a perfect Christian. I do not claim to have all the answers. I am a man who has made mistakes, learned difficult lessons, and spent many nights asking God for wisdom when I felt overwhelmed by responsibilities greater than myself. Today I want to share a story that I have carried in my heart for a long time. This is not a story about politics. It is not a story about military strategy. It is not a story about power. It is a story about what happened when I found myself standing at the edge of death and encountered a truth that completely changed the way I see leadership, forgiveness, and the purpose of life itself. There are moments that divide a person's life into two chapters: the person you were before and the person you became afterward. What I am about to tell you became that dividing line for me. For years, people have asked how I continue moving forward despite danger, threats, attempted plots, and constant pressure. Some assume the answer is courage. Others think it is discipline or military training. The truth is far deeper than that. What transformed me was not something I learned from a battlefield. It was a message that came during the very hours when I believed my journey on earth had reached its end. And everything began on a tense afternoon in Ouagadougou, when intelligence reports warned that a new coup attempt might already be underway. That was the day I thought I was going to die. It was also the day my real journey began. The afternoon began like many others during a period when uncertainty had become part of daily life. The sun stood high above Ouagadougou, casting its light across the city, yet there was a heaviness in the air that I could not ignore. For months, our nation had been living through difficult challenges. Burkina Faso had experienced political instability, security threats, and constant attempts by various groups to influence the future of the country. Leadership during such times is never simple. Many people imagine that a president spends his days making speeches and attending ceremonies. The reality is very different. Every decision carries consequences. Every report can contain information that affects thousands or even millions of lives. That afternoon, I was reviewing security updates when several members of my protective team entered the room. Their faces immediately told me something was wrong. They were experienced men. They did not panic easily. They did not interrupt meetings without reason. One of them stepped forward and handed me a report. Intelligence sources had detected signs of a possible armed operation being planned against key government facilities. The information was still being verified, but the warning was serious enough that security forces had already begun increasing their readiness. I read the report carefully. Then I read it again. The room became quiet. No one spoke for several moments. Outside the building, daily activities continued. Vehicles moved through the streets. Government employees carried out their responsibilities. Citizens went about their routines. Yet inside those walls, everyone understood that the situation could change at any moment. One officer suggested relocating me immediately. Another recommended moving to a secure military installation until the threat could be fully assessed. A third officer proposed limiting all movement and communications. Their concerns were understandable. They had sworn to protect me. They were doing their duty. But I also knew something they knew as well. If danger truly existed, then the people working around me were facing the same risk. The guards at the gates, the administrative staff, the communication teams, the young soldiers assigned to security posts. How could I ask them to remain in place while I left? I looked around the room and saw men who had families waiting for them at home. Some had children, some had elderly parents, some had sacrificed years of their lives in service to the nation. At that moment, I remembered the values that had guided me since my military training. A leader cannot ask others to face dangers he refuses to face himself. I thanked the officers for their recommendations. Then I told them I would remain where I was. The room became silent again. One of them argued respectfully that my safety was essential to national stability. Another reminded me that the threat could be larger than we understood. I listened carefully. Their arguments were reasonable, yet my decision remained unchanged. I told them that if the intelligence reports proved correct, then every person in that building deserved the same courage from their leader that was being asked of them. I did not say those words because I believed I was fearless. The truth is that I felt fear. Only a foolish man claims he never feels fear. Fear is part of being human. What matters is what we do with it. I had learned long ago that courage does not mean the absence of fear. Courage means continuing forward despite fear. As the afternoon progressed, more reports arrived. Some appeared contradictory. Others seemed to confirm earlier warnings. Communication channels became increasingly active. Military commanders checked readiness levels. Security teams repositioned personnel. The atmosphere throughout the compound gradually changed. People spoke more quietly. Footsteps moved more quickly. Every phone call seemed urgent. Every update carried weight. I remained at my desk reviewing information and coordinating responses. Yet deep inside, I sensed that something significant was approaching. It is difficult to explain. Sometimes there are moments when your spirit feels a warning before your mind fully understands it. I felt that kind of warning. I thought about my family. I thought about the people of Burkina Faso. I thought about the countless citizens who face danger every day without protection, recognition, or headlines. And then a question entered my mind. What if this is my final day? The thought did not arrive dramatically. It came quietly, calmly, almost like a whisper. I sat back and reflected on my life. Had I done everything perfectly? Certainly not. Had I made mistakes? Many. Had I always chosen the right path? No. But I had tried to serve my country with sincerity. I had tried to act according to my conscience. Most importantly, I had tried to keep faith in God even during moments when answers seemed impossible to find. As the hours passed, the tension continued building. Outside, security personnel increased patrols. Inside, communication equipment buzzed with constant updates. Everyone sensed that events were moving toward a confrontation. No one knew exactly when, no one knew exactly where, but everyone felt it coming. I remember looking through a window toward the city. The sight appeared peaceful. Children were probably returning home from school. Families were preparing evening meals. Workers were finishing their shifts. Life continued as normal. Yet beneath that appearance of normality, uncertainty was growing. Looking back now, I realized that afternoon represented the final chapter of one version of myself. At the time, I still believed leadership was primarily about strength, determination, and resilience. I believed those qualities were enough. I had not yet learned the lesson that would soon change everything. I had not yet experienced the event that would force me to confront my own anger, my own wounds, and my own understanding of power. The warning reports continued arriving. The atmosphere became heavier. The hours moved slowly. Then, without warning, the first explosion shattered the silence. And in that instant, everything changed. The first explosion came without warning. One moment, the compound was filled with tension and uncertainty. The next, the sound of violence tore through the afternoon. The blast echoed across the grounds with such force that the windows around us shook violently. For a brief second, nobody moved. It was as if every person present needed a moment to understand what had just happened. Then the gunfire began. Short bursts at first, then more, then many. The sounds merged into a chaotic storm of noise that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Training immediately took over. Security officers rushed into motion. Commands were shouted. Communication devices crackled continuously. Protective teams moved toward their assigned positions. The uncertainty that had hung over the day suddenly became reality. The threat was no longer a possibility. It was happening. One of my guards entered the room and ordered everyone to move immediately. Another informed me that security teams were attempting to determine the source of the attack. The expressions on their faces told me everything I needed to know. This was serious. Very serious. I stood and began moving toward a secure section of the building while receiving updates from personnel around me. Information arrived rapidly. Some reports conflicted with others. No one yet had a complete picture of the situation. All we knew was that armed violence had erupted and that the compound had become dangerous. The sounds outside intensified. Gunfire echoed across the area. Additional explosions followed. Some seemed distant. Others sounded frighteningly close. Every detonation sent vibrations through the walls and floors. The atmosphere felt surreal. Only minutes earlier, we had been discussing intelligence reports. Now we were living through the very scenario those reports had warned about. As we moved through a corridor, I noticed the determination on the faces of the young soldiers assigned to security positions. Many of them were far younger than me. Some were barely old enough to have accumulated much life experience. Yet there they stood, prepared to face danger without hesitation. At that moment, I felt an overwhelming responsibility toward them. A leader carries many burdens. One of the greatest is knowing that others may risk their lives because of decisions connected to your leadership. That reality never becomes easy. Another explosion erupted nearby. This one was much closer. The shockwave struck the building hard enough to send dust from the ceiling. Several people instinctively ducked. The sound was deafening. For a moment, communication became nearly impossible. My ears rang. The air felt thick. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Security personnel urged me to move faster. We continued through the compound while teams attempted to coordinate evacuation procedures for civilian employees and support staff. Despite the chaos, my focus remained on ensuring as many people as possible reached safety. I remember seeing fear in many faces. Not panic. Fear. There is a difference. Panic destroys judgment. Fear simply reminds us that danger is real. I felt it myself. Anyone who claims otherwise has likely never stood close to genuine uncertainty. The sounds of violence continued. The attacks seemed relentless. Every few moments another burst of gunfire echoed through the area. Every few moments another explosion reminded us how fragile life truly is. As we moved toward another section of the compound, I found myself thinking about how quickly everything can change. A normal afternoon can become a crisis in seconds. A routine conversation can become a final conversation without warning. A future that appears certain can suddenly disappear. Those thoughts came and went rapidly. There was no time to dwell on them. The situation demanded action. Then came the moment that changed everything. It happened so quickly that even now it feels difficult to describe. One instant I was moving with members of my security team. The next, a massive explosion erupted nearby. The force was unlike anything I had experienced that day. A powerful shockwave struck with tremendous violence. It felt as though the world itself had exploded around me. I was thrown through the air. There was no opportunity to react. No opportunity to protect myself. No opportunity to understand what was happening. One moment I was standing. The next I was falling. My head struck concrete with tremendous force. Pain shot through my body instantly. Every part of me seemed to ignite at once. The impact was overwhelming. For several moments I could not breathe properly. I could not think clearly. I could barely understand where I was. Everything blurred together. The noise, the dust, the confusion, the pain. Voices surrounded me. Some sounded close. Others sounded distant. I attempted to move, but my body felt heavy. The strength seemed to drain from my limbs. My vision became unclear. Shapes appeared distorted. The sky above me faded in and out of focus. I heard someone shouting instructions. Another voice called for medical assistance. Somewhere nearby, gunfire continued. Yet the sounds no longer seemed connected to reality. They felt distant, as though they belonged to another world. I tried to remain conscious. I told myself not to close my eyes. I told myself to stay awake. But maintaining awareness became increasingly difficult. The pain that had initially felt overwhelming began changing into something different. Everything started drifting away. The sounds became quieter. The movement around me became slower. The world seemed to be retreating into the distance. My thoughts became fragmented. I remember thinking about my country. I remember thinking about the people I loved. I remember wondering whether this was the end. There was no anger in those final moments of awareness. No frustration. No political thoughts. No concern about power. Only a simple realization. Life is fragile. Far more fragile than we often admit. For years I had lived surrounded by responsibilities, decisions, meetings, crises, and expectations. Yet lying there on the concrete, none of those things seemed important. What mattered were people, faith, purpose, love, the things we often overlook while pursuing other goals. My vision darkened further. The edges of the world disappeared. The sounds faded almost completely. Then I heard something one final time, a voice calling my name. One of my comrades, one of the men who had stood beside me through difficult times. His voice sounded distant, desperate, and determined. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him I could still hear him, but I no longer had the strength. The darkness continued growing. The world around me slipped further away. My final conscious thought was simple. Perhaps this is the day I die. Then everything disappeared, and what happened next was something I could never have imagined. When the darkness finally closed around me, I believed my life had ended. There was no struggle. There was no resistance. There was no dramatic awareness of leaving the world behind. One moment I was surrounded by noise, confusion, pain, and fear. The next, all of it was gone. Completely gone. The change happened so suddenly that it felt impossible. The gunfire disappeared. The explosions vanished. The shouting stopped. The pain that had consumed my body only moments before simply ceased to exist. At first I thought perhaps I was dreaming. Then I realized that whatever was happening felt more real than any dream I had ever experienced. The first thing I noticed was the absence of fear. That may sound like a small detail, but it was extraordinary. For years, I had lived under pressure. Every leader carries burdens that most people never see. There are threats. There are responsibilities. There are expectations. There are disappointments. There are constant worries about the future. Even during moments of rest, those concerns often remain somewhere in the background. But now they were gone. Every one of them. I felt no fear, no anxiety, no anger, no hatred, no bitterness. Nothing that had troubled me throughout my years of leadership seemed capable of reaching me. Instead, I experienced something I struggle to describe even today. Peace. Not ordinary peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from a successful day or a favorable outcome. This was something deeper, something beyond human language. It felt as though every wound within my spirit had suddenly become silent. Every burden had been lifted. Every weight had disappeared. For the first time in many years, I felt completely free. As the awareness grew, I realized I was no longer experiencing the world in the way I had known it before. There was no sense of urgency, no sense of danger, no sense of time. In fact, I could not tell whether seconds or hours were passing. Time seemed irrelevant. I simply existed within an overwhelming atmosphere of calm. Gradually, I became aware of light. At first, it appeared distant, soft, gentle. Then it began to surround everything. This was not ordinary light. It did not resemble sunlight. It did not resemble artificial light. It possessed a warmth that seemed alive. The more I noticed it, the more I felt comforted by it. What surprised me most was that the light did not hurt my eyes. It did not overwhelm me. Instead, it seemed to reach places inside my heart that I had forgotten existed. Many years of hardship had hardened parts of me. War can do that. Conflict can do that. Leadership during difficult times can do that. A person learns to build walls around his emotions. A person learns to protect himself from disappointment. A person learns to expect betrayal. Without realizing it, I had become accustomed to carrying invisible armor. Yet within that light, I felt those walls beginning to disappear. Not because anyone forced them away. They simply no longer seemed necessary. The atmosphere felt filled with understanding, filled with acceptance, filled with a love that expected nothing in return. As I stood there, I became aware of another realization. I was no longer thinking about my enemies. For years, many people had opposed me. Some criticized me openly. Others worked against me quietly. Some wished to remove me from leadership. Others wished to see me fail. Still others wanted something even worse. Under normal circumstances, thoughts of such people often triggered frustration. Sometimes anger, sometimes disappointment. Yet now none of those emotions remained. I looked back on every conflict of my life and felt something unexpected. Compassion, not agreement, not approval, compassion. I cannot fully explain why. I only know that in that place, many of the things that once seemed important suddenly appeared small. Pride seemed small. Political victories seemed small. Personal grievances seemed small. Arguments seemed small. The desire to prove oneself right seemed small. Compared to the peace surrounding me, those things no longer appeared significant. As I reflected on my life, memories began moving through my mind. Not as a sequence of events. Not like a film. More like moments connected by meaning. I remembered childhood experiences. I remembered military training. I remembered difficult decisions. I remembered victories. I remembered failures. I remembered people who had helped me. I remembered people I had disappointed. I remembered words I wished I had spoken, and words I wished I had never spoken. What struck me most was not what I had accomplished. It was how I had treated people. That realization affected me deeply. Human beings spend much of their lives pursuing success. We pursue influence, We pursue recognition. We pursue achievements. Yet standing within that extraordinary peace, none of those things seemed central. What mattered was something simpler. How had I loved others? How had I served others? How had I responded when challenged? How had I behaved when power was placed in my hands? Those questions felt more important than any title I had ever held. The peace continued surrounding me. The light continued growing, and as it did, I began sensing that I was not alone. At first, I could not explain why. I saw no one. I heard no voices. Yet I felt a presence unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It was not threatening. It was not intimidating. It was not mysterious in the way people often describe supernatural experiences. Instead, it felt familiar, as though I had always known it, as though I had been searching for it my entire life without realizing it. The awareness grew stronger. The atmosphere around me seemed filled with purpose, filled with meaning, filled with a love so profound that it reached beyond every wound, every regret, and every fear I had ever carried. I stood there silently, no longer thinking about politics, no longer thinking about danger, no longer thinking about survival. I simply existed within that overwhelming peace. Then something extraordinary began to happen. The light ahead of me grew brighter, not harshly brighter, not painfully brighter, beautifully brighter. A radiant glow of white and gold seemed to emerge before me. The atmosphere changed. The sense of presence intensified. I knew instinctively that something important was about to occur, something that would alter my understanding of life forever. The light continued approaching, and from within that glorious brightness, a figure began to appear. The moment I saw him, I understood immediately. No one needed to tell me who he was. No introduction was necessary. No explanation was required. Before he spoke a single word, before he took another step toward me, my heart already knew. The one standing before me was Jesus. And what happened next changed everything I believed about leadership, strength, forgiveness, and the purpose of my life. The figure continued walking toward me through the light. Even now, years later, I struggle to find words strong enough to describe what I experienced in that moment. Everything about him radiated peace. Everything about him radiated authority. Yet it was not the kind of authority that demands obedience through fear. It was the kind of authority that naturally inspires trust. The closer he came, the more overwhelmed I became. The white and golden light surrounding him seemed alive, not merely bright. Alive. It carried warmth, comfort, understanding, hope. Every step he took filled me with a sense of security unlike anything I had ever known. For much of my life, I had associated strength with determination, with discipline, with endurance, with the ability to continue moving forward despite hardship. But standing before him, I encountered a different kind of strength. A strength rooted in love. A strength rooted in truth. A strength so complete that it needed neither violence nor intimidation to prove itself. I looked into his face. What I saw there changed me. There was mercy, deep mercy, not the kind offered reluctantly, not the kind offered only to those who deserve it. A mercy that seemed endless. A mercy that saw every flaw, every mistake, every weakness within me and still chose love. His eyes held both gentleness and power. Those two qualities existed together perfectly. Nothing about him felt weak. Nothing about him felt harsh. For the first time in my life, I understood that true power and true compassion are not opposites. They belong together. The realization struck me deeply. Before I could stop myself, I fell to my knees. Not because anyone commanded me. Not because I was forced. I simply could not remain standing. The weight of his presence was overwhelming, not heavy. Hoy. My emotions burst forward all at once. For years, I had carried burdens that few people fully understood. The pressure of leadership, the fear of failure, the grief caused by violence, the disappointment of betrayal, the exhaustion of constant struggle. As a leader, you learn to hide many things. People expect strength. People expect confidence. People expect certainty. They rarely see the private battles. They rarely see the nights spent wrestling with difficult decisions. They rarely see the emotional cost of carrying responsibility for others. Standing before Jesus, every wall I had built around my heart collapsed. I began to cry, not quietly, not with restraint. The tears came freely. Years of pain seemed to pour out of me. Years of frustration. Years of disappointment. Years of questions. He simply stood there and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not condemn me. He did not criticize me. His presence alone seemed to invite honesty, complete honesty. I told him how tired I was. I told him about the pressure. I told him about the endless conflicts. I told him about the people who wanted to destroy everything we were trying to build. I spoke about betrayal. I spoke about fear. I spoke about anger, especially anger. That was perhaps the hardest part, because deep inside I knew anger had become a growing part of my life. Not always visible, not always expressed, but present. There are wounds that leaders carry silently. Every attack leaves a mark. Every betrayal leaves a scar. Every threat leaves a shadow. Over time, those wounds can transform into anger without a person fully realizing it. I told him how difficult it had become to trust people. I told him how often I expected opposition. I told him how frequently I viewed others through the lens of conflict. Then I said something I had never admitted so openly before. I told him that I was tired of war. Not only physical war, the war inside the heart. The constant battle between hope and disappointment. The battle between faith and fear. The battle between forgiveness and resentment. The battle between compassion and anger. As I spoke, he listened with complete attention. There was no judgment in his eyes, no impatience, no condemnation, only understanding. Then he spoke. His voice was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was gentle, yet it carried immense authority. It was calm, yet every word seemed filled with truth. When he spoke, I felt as though every part of my being heard him at once. Not merely my ears, my heart, my mind, my spirit, everything. Ibrahim, he said. Hearing my name from his lips affected me more deeply than I can explain. It felt personal, intimate, as though he knew every chapter of my life completely. Every success, every failure, every hidden struggle, every fear, every hope, every regret. And still, he spoke my name with love, not accusation. Love. That realization alone brought fresh tears. For so much of life, people define us by our achievements or mistakes. Some see only success. Others see only failure. Some praise. Others criticize. But Jesus saw everything, and his love remained unchanged. That truth shook me. I had spent years trying to be strong, years trying to carry burdens, years trying to protect others. Yet in his presence, I understood something important. God never asked me to carry the world alone. He never asked me to become invincible. He never asked me to live without weakness. He asked me to trust him. That sounds simple, yet many leaders struggle with it. We become accustomed to solving problems ourselves. We become accustomed to taking responsibility. We become accustomed to believing that everything depends on our own efforts. Without realizing it, we begin carrying burdens that were never meant for us. Standing before Jesus, I felt those burdens beginning to lift. Not because my responsibilities disappeared, not because the problems facing my nation disappeared, but because I finally understood that I was not carrying them alone. The peace that accompanied that realization was extraordinary. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence itself felt meaningful, not empty, meaningful. Then Jesus looked at me with an expression I will never forget. There was love in his eyes, but there was also concern. Not concern for my safety, not concern for my political future, concern for my heart. That surprised me. At the time, I believed the greatest threats in my life came from external enemies, armed groups, political opponents, those who wished me harm. But as he looked at me, I sensed he was focused on something else. Something happening inside me. Something far more dangerous than I had realized. I did not yet understand what he intended to show me. I did not yet understand the lesson he was preparing to teach. But I knew change was coming. The kind of change that reaches the deepest parts of a person's character. The kind of change that transforms not only how someone leads, but how someone lives. Then Jesus extended his hand. The light around us seemed to expand. The atmosphere shifted once again, and he began showing me images of leaders whose lives carried a lesson I desperately needed to learn. What they had in common surprised me. None of them were perfect. None of them lived without mistakes. Yet each of them understood a truth that I had begun to forget. A truth more powerful than anger. A truth more powerful than revenge. A truth capable of changing nations. As Jesus extended his hand, the light surrounding us began to change. It did not disappear. Instead, it seemed to open before me like a living window. Images began to appear with extraordinary clarity. I was no longer focused on myself. I was being shown lessons, not through lectures, not through commands, through the lives of people who had walked difficult roads before me. The first face I recognized immediately. I had studied his life before. Like many Africans, I knew his story. The world remembers him as a symbol of freedom and reconciliation. But what Jesus showed me went deeper than the history books. I saw a man sitting alone in confinement. A man separated from normal life for many years. A man who had every reason to become consumed by bitterness. The years passed before my eyes. Not 1 year. Not 5 years. Not 10 years. Decades. Long years of imprisonment. Long years of lost opportunities. Long years of hardship. As I watched, a thought entered my mind. If anyone had a reason to seek revenge, surely it was him. If anyone had a reason to hate those who had oppressed him, surely it was him. If anyone had justification for anger, surely it was him. Yet the image continued. I saw the moment when freedom finally arrived. I saw a nation standing at a dangerous crossroads. A nation carrying deep wounds. A nation divided by fear, suspicion, and painful history. The potential for widespread conflict was real. Many expected revenge. Many expected retaliation. Many expected old wounds to produce new violence. Instead, Mandela chose a different path. He chose reconciliation. Not because the past did not matter. Not because injustice had not occurred. Not because suffering should be ignored. He chose reconciliation because he understood something important. Hatred multiplies itself. Violence reproduces itself. Bitterness spreads like fire. Someone must decide to stop the cycle. As I watched, Jesus spoke. Look carefully. His voice remained gentle, yet every word carried tremendous weight. I continued watching. Mandela was not being shown as a perfect man. He was being shown as a man who made a difficult choice. A man who refused to allow pain to become the master of his future. Then Jesus said something that pierced my heart. He understood that forgiveness protects the one who forgives. Those words stayed with me. For years, I had viewed forgiveness primarily as something offered to others. Now I began understanding another dimension. Forgiveness also protects the human heart from becoming imprisoned by anger. The image slowly faded. Then another appeared. This time I saw Julius Nyerere. His face carried a calm dignity. His leadership journey unfolded before me. I saw a man committed to national unity. A man who often placed the interests of his people above personal ambition. No leader is flawless. No leader escapes mistakes. Yet there was something Jesus wanted me to notice. Humility. Nyerere possessed influence. He possessed authority. He possessed respect. Yet he consistently emphasized service over personal glory. As I watched, I reflected on how easily power can influence the human heart. Leadership creates temptations. Not always obvious temptations. Sometimes subtle ones. The temptation to believe your position makes you more important than others. The temptation to believe your opinions matter more than everyone else's. The temptation to value control more than wisdom. The temptation to protect pride rather than pursue truth. These temptations affect leaders everywhere. They affect presidents. They affect military commanders. They affect business executives. They affect religious leaders. They affect anyone entrusted with influence. Watching Nyerere's example forced me to examine my own heart. Had I always remained humble? No. Had I always listened carefully to others? No. Had I always responded graciously to criticism? Certainly not. The realization was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Jesus was not showing me these leaders so I could admire them. He was showing them to me so I could learn. The image changed once more. Now I saw Seretse Khama. Again I recognized the face. Again I knew parts of the story. But what unfolded before me highlighted qualities I had never fully appreciated. I watched a leader confronting challenges that could have produced division. Challenges that could have produced conflict. Challenges that could have encouraged harsh responses. Yet repeatedly I saw dialogue, patience, restraint, wisdom, not weakness. Wisdom. That distinction became important. Many people confuse restraint with weakness. Many people assume strength requires aggression. Many people believe that every challenge must be met with force. But genuine wisdom often chooses a different path. Wisdom asks questions before reacting. Wisdom listens before speaking. Wisdom seeks understanding before judgment. Wisdom values long-term peace over short-term victory. As these scenes unfolded, I began recognizing a pattern. The men Jesus showed me came from different circumstances, different nations, different backgrounds, different personalities. Yet they shared something powerful. None of them allowed anger to become their primary guide. They faced difficulties. They faced opposition. They faced criticism. They faced suffering. Yet they consistently sought something greater than revenge. The realization challenged me deeply, because by that point in my life, anger had become more influential than I wanted to admit. Not uncontrolled anger, not explosive anger, something more dangerous. Quiet anger, the kind that settles into the heart, the kind that shapes perception, the kind that slowly changes how a person views others. I began realizing that I had increasingly viewed many people through the lens of conflict. Those who supported me became allies. Those who opposed me became adversaries. Those who criticized me became obstacles. Those who threatened me became enemies. The categories seemed logical. The categories seemed reasonable. Yet Jesus was showing me something different. Human beings are more than categories, more than labels, more than political positions, more than disagreements. Every person carries fears. Every person carries wounds. Every person carries struggles. Every person carries value, even when we disagree with them, even when they oppose us, even when they hurt us. That lesson was difficult, perhaps one of the most difficult lessons I have ever faced. Then Jesus spoke again. His words remain permanently engraved in my memory. These men were not perfect. The statement surprised me. Of course they were not perfect. No human being is. Yet Jesus intentionally emphasized that fact. Why? Because I think he wanted me to understand something crucial. The lesson was not about finding flawless examples. The lesson was about understanding eternal principles. The value of mercy, the value of humility, the value of restraint, the value of reconciliation, the value of choosing love when hatred appears easier. Then he continued, but they understood that love can accomplish what violence cannot. The words echoed through my spirit. Love can accomplish what violence cannot. At first glance, some people may consider that statement naive, especially in a world filled with conflict, especially for someone with a military background, especially for leaders responsible for protecting citizens. Yet Jesus was not suggesting that justice should disappear. He was not suggesting that nations should ignore threats. He was not suggesting that leaders abandon responsibility. He was speaking about something deeper. Violence can force compliance. Violence can create fear. Violence can achieve temporary results, but violence cannot heal hearts. Violence cannot create genuine unity. Violence cannot produce trust. Violence cannot transform human character. Only love possesses that power. Only mercy possesses that power. Only grace possesses that power. As I absorbed his words, I felt conviction growing within me. Not condemnation, conviction. There is a difference. Condemnation says there is no hope. Conviction points toward transformation. Jesus was not condemning me. He was preparing me to confront something hidden inside my own heart, something that had been growing quietly for years, something I had justified, something I believed was necessary, something I thought made me stronger. But in reality, it was weakening me. The images gradually faded. The light remained. Jesus turned his attention fully toward me once again. The atmosphere became intensely personal. I sensed that the next lesson would no longer concern historical examples. It would concern me directly. The thought made me uneasy. Part of me already knew what he was about to address. Part of me already knew which area of my life needed healing. Yet I was not fully prepared for what came next. Jesus looked at me with compassion. Then he spoke words that revealed a truth I had been avoiding for a very long time. The images had disappeared. The examples of Mandela, Nyerere, and Seretse Khama remained fresh in my mind, but now all my attention was fixed on Jesus. The light around him remained warm and peaceful. Yet I sensed that what he was about to say would challenge me more deeply than anything I had heard so far. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt purposeful, as though he was allowing everything I had just witnessed to settle within my heart. Then he looked directly at me. His gaze was filled with compassion, not accusation. Not disappointment, compassion. That made what happened next even more powerful. Ibrahim, he said gently. The moment I heard my name, I felt completely exposed. Not exposed in a negative way, exposed in truth. There was nothing hidden. No explanation was necessary. No defense was possible. He knew me completely. Every thought, every fear, every struggle, every hidden wound. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. Ibrahim, you are carrying too much anger. The statement struck me harder than any explosion I had experienced that day. For a moment I wanted to disagree. Part of me immediately searched for reasons to justify myself. Part of me wanted to explain why my anger existed. Part of me wanted to defend it. And before I could stop myself, I did exactly that. Lord, I replied, they want to kill me. The words came from a place of honesty. Because it was true. There were people who wanted to remove me. There were people who wanted to destroy everything we were trying to build. There were people who viewed me not as a human being but as an obstacle. I had seen betrayal. I had seen violence. I had seen threats. I had seen enough darkness to make anger seem reasonable. For a brief moment, I waited for him to acknowledge my argument. Instead, Jesus simply nodded. I know. That was all he said. 3 simple words. I know. He did not deny my experiences. He did not minimize my pain. He did not pretend that injustice did not exist. He knew. Completely. Perfectly. Yet his response revealed something I had not understood. The existence of injustice does not automatically justify allowing anger to control the heart. That realization unsettled me, because I began seeing how often I had allowed difficult experiences to shape my perspective. Every betrayal had left a mark. Every threat had left a scar. Every disappointment had created another layer of emotional armor. Over time, those layers accumulated. I told myself they were necessary. I told myself they made me stronger. I told myself they helped me survive. But standing before Jesus, I began questioning whether they had also changed me in ways I had failed to notice. Jesus continued looking at me. Then he spoke words from Scripture, not as quotations from a book, as living truth. The first passage came from the Gospel of Matthew. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I knew the verse. Most Christians know it. Many have read it countless times. Yet hearing those words from Jesus himself felt entirely different. Suddenly I understood why so many people struggle with them. Because they challenge our natural instincts. It is easy to love people who love us. It is easy to support people who support us. It is easy to forgive those who never hurt us deeply. But enemies, those who oppose us, those who cause pain, those who seek our downfall, that is different. Very different. My mind immediately resisted. How can someone love an enemy? How can someone pray for those who wish harm upon them? How can someone respond to hostility with compassion? The questions flooded my thoughts. Jesus understood every one of them before I spoke. Then he continued. This time his words echoed another passage. Do good to those who hate you. Again, I felt resistance. Not because I doubted his wisdom, because I recognized how difficult the instruction truly was. Human nature prefers balance. If someone hurts us, we want justice. If someone attacks us, we want protection. If someone betrays us, we want accountability. These desires are understandable. Some are even necessary. But Jesus was speaking about something beyond human instinct. He was speaking about the condition of the heart. He was speaking about freedom. At that moment, I began realizing something uncomfortable. The people who opposed me occupied far more space in my mind than they deserved. Their actions influenced my emotions. Their criticism affected my thoughts. Their hostility shaped my reactions. Without realizing it, I had given them influence over parts of my inner life. Jesus was showing me that anger often grants power to the very people we oppose. The more we dwell on them, the more control they gain. The more we feed resentment, the more it shapes us. The more we nurture bitterness, the more it becomes part of our identity. That realization struck deeply. Then came another passage, one that pierced directly into my heart. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. The words seemed to echo endlessly. Do not be overcome by evil. I had always interpreted that verse in terms of external threats. Now I saw another meaning. Evil does not only attack from outside. Sometimes it seeks entry through the wounds inside us. Sometimes hatred attempts to reproduce itself through our responses. Sometimes bitterness attempts to spread by convincing us it is justified. Sometimes anger disguises itself as strength. That was the lesson I needed. I had believed my anger made me stronger. In reality, it was slowly shaping me into someone I did not want to become. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Gradually. The most dangerous changes often occur gradually. A little more suspicion. A little less patience. A little less compassion. A little more resentment. A little more emotional distance. Each change appears small, yet together they transform a person. Jesus knew this. That is why he addressed my heart before addressing anything else. Then he spoke words I will never forget. Forgiveness is not weakness. I listened carefully, because this was a point I had struggled with. Many leaders struggle with it. Many soldiers struggle with it. Many people struggle with it. The world often teaches that forgiveness is surrender, that mercy is weakness, that restraint is vulnerability, that compassion makes a person easy to exploit. But Jesus presented a completely different perspective. He continued, controlling anger requires more strength than expressing it. The truth of that statement hit me immediately. Anyone can react. Anyone can lash out. Anyone can respond emotionally. Those actions require little discipline, little wisdom, little self-control. But remaining calm when emotions surge, listening when pride wants to speak, seeking understanding when anger wants judgment, offering mercy when resentment demands revenge, those things require strength, real strength, the kind of strength that begins within the heart. As he spoke, memories surfaced, moments when I had reacted too quickly, moments when frustration had influenced decisions, moments when anger had clouded judgment. I was not proud of those memories, yet I could no longer ignore them. Jesus was not revealing them to shame me. He was revealing them to heal me. That distinction mattered. Every lesson he taught flowed from love, not condemnation. Love. Then he revealed the deepest truth of all. Ibrahim, you have begun seeing opponents as enemies. The words stopped me, because they were true, painfully true. Over time, I had allowed conflict to simplify people into categories. Supporters, opponents, friends, enemies. Yet human beings are far more complex than those labels. Every person carries fears. Every person carries hopes. Every person carries wounds. Every person carries struggles invisible to others. Recognizing that reality does not eliminate accountability. It does not eliminate justice. It does not eliminate responsibility, but it changes how we see people. Instead of viewing them as obstacles, we begin seeing them as human beings. That realization transformed something inside me. Not instantly, not completely, but significantly. For the first time, I began understanding that leadership involves more than protecting a nation. It also involves protecting one's heart, because a wounded heart can eventually wound others. A fearful heart can spread fear. An angry heart can spread anger, but a healed heart can spread hope. And that, I was beginning to learn, was the kind of leadership Jesus wanted from me. After Jesus revealed the demands I had been carrying, I expected him to continue speaking about forgiveness. Instead, he began teaching me something far more practical. He showed me that transformation does not happen through inspiration alone. It happens through daily choices, daily disciplines, daily decisions that shape the heart over time. Many people believe anger appears suddenly. That is not entirely true. Most anger grows gradually. It grows through repeated thoughts, repeated disappointments, repeated frustrations, repeated wounds that are never fully healed. Eventually, the accumulation becomes heavy enough to influence how a person sees the world. Jesus knew that if my heart was going to change, I needed more than a warning. I needed guidance. I needed principles. I needed a new way of responding to life's challenges. The first principle he taught me seemed simple, yet it carried enormous wisdom. Be silent before you react. At first, I wondered why this mattered so much. Then he helped me understand. Many of the worst decisions people make occur during moments of emotional intensity. A harsh word spoken in anger, a relationship damaged by pride, a decision made in frustration, a judgment formed too quickly. These things often happen because we react before we reflect. Silence creates space. Space allows wisdom to enter. Silence slows the storm. Silence gives truth an opportunity to speak. As I listened, memories returned. I remembered meetings where frustration had tempted me to respond immediately. I remembered situations where emotions had pushed me toward quick conclusions. I remembered moments when a few minutes of silence could have prevented unnecessary conflict. Jesus was showing me that silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is one of the strongest actions a person can take. Then he revealed the second principle. Pray before you decide. Those words may sound simple to many Christians, yet I realize that even faithful believers often forget them. Leaders especially. The demands of responsibility create urgency. Problems arrive quickly. Decisions cannot always wait. The pressure to act becomes intense. Over time, it becomes easy to rely primarily on experience, knowledge, or instinct. None of those things are unimportant. But Jesus was reminding me of something greater. Wisdom begins with seeking God. not after making a decision, before making it. Prayer changes perspective. Prayer calms fear. Prayer exposes selfish motives. Prayer reveals hidden emotions. Prayer reminds us that we are not alone. As he spoke, I realized there had been many occasions when I approached prayer as a final step rather than a first step. I prayed after problems emerged. I prayed after difficulties appeared. I prayed after decisions became complicated. But Jesus was teaching me to begin there, to seek God's guidance before moving forward. Not because God needs information, because we need wisdom. The lesson touched me deeply. Then came the third principle: never act while your emotions are exploding. This lesson felt especially personal, because emotions can be powerful. Fear, frustration, disappointment, anger, even excitement. All emotions influence perception. All emotions affect judgment. Jesus was not teaching me to ignore emotions. He was teaching me not to let them become my master. I began seeing how many conflicts throughout history had started because people acted during moments of emotional intensity. Nations, families, friendships, communities, organizations. Countless divisions began when people allowed emotions to control decisions. The wisdom of restraint suddenly became clear. When emotions are strongest, clarity is often weakest. Waiting creates perspective. Patience creates understanding. Time allows truth to separate itself from emotion. I listened carefully as these lessons settled into my heart. Each principle felt simple, yet each carried tremendous power. Then Jesus revealed the fourth principle: understand the fears of the other person. This principle surprised me, perhaps more than any other, because it required me to see people differently, especially those who oppose me. Human beings often focus on behavior. We see what people do. We hear what people say. We respond to their actions. But Jesus directed my attention deeper, toward the fears beneath the actions, the fears beneath the words, the fears beneath the hostility. As I reflected, I began recognizing something important. Many people act from fear. Fear of losing power, fear of losing security, fear of being ignored, fear of being replaced, fear of uncertainty, fear of change. Fear often disguises itself as anger. Fear often disguises itself as aggression. Fear often disguises itself as opposition. Recognizing that truth does not excuse harmful behavior, but it creates understanding. And understanding changes how we respond. For years I had spent much of my energy analyzing actions. Jesus was teaching me to understand motivations, to look deeper, to ask questions, to seek understanding before judgment. The lesson challenged me profoundly because it required humility. It required patience. It required seeing people as human beings rather than problems. Then came the fifth principle, the one that tied all the others together. Jesus looked at me and spoke with extraordinary tenderness. Never forget that every human being has value before God. The moment he said those words, something shifted inside me, because I realized how easy it is to forget this truth, especially during conflict, especially during disagreement, especially during periods of tension. When people hurt us, we begin seeing them through the lens of the hurt. When people oppose us, we begin seeing them through the lens of the opposition. When people disappoint us, we begin seeing them through the lens of the disappointment. Gradually, we stop seeing the person. We only see the problem. Jesus was reminding me that every human being carries dignity. Every human being bears value. Every human being matters to God. The supporter, the critic, the friend, the opponent, the believer, the skeptic, the wealthy, the poor, the powerful, the forgotten, every person. This truth changed the way I understood leadership, because leadership is ultimately about people, not systems, not titles, not position, people. And people cannot be led well unless they are valued. For several moments I reflected silently on everything Jesus had taught me. The principles seemed straightforward, yet I knew they would require daily effort, daily discipline, daily surrender. Transformation rarely occurs through a single dramatic moment. It occurs through repeated choices, repeated obedience, repeated willingness to grow. Then Jesus spoke words that became one of the defining lessons of my life. His voice remained gentle, yet the authority behind it was unmistakable. A strong leader is not the one who makes people afraid. I listened carefully, because much of the world believes the opposite. Many people associate strength with intimidation, with dominance, with control. with the ability to force outcomes. But Jesus continued, "A strong leader is the one who helps others find hope." Hope. The word echoed through my spirit. Hope. Not fear. Not intimidation. Hope. I thought about the people of Burkina Faso, the farmers, the workers, the teachers, the soldiers, the parents, the children growing up amid uncertainty. What did they need most? Fear? No. They already had enough fear. What they needed was hope. Hope for tomorrow. Hope for peace. Hope for opportunity. Hope for healing. Hope for a future better than the present. At that moment, I began understanding leadership in a completely new way. Leadership is not merely about directing people. It is about serving them, not merely about exercising authority. It is about creating hope, not merely about protecting a nation. It is about helping people believe that tomorrow can be better than today. That realization transformed my understanding of power itself. Power without compassion becomes oppression. Power without wisdom becomes danger. Power without humility becomes arrogance. But power guided by love becomes service. And service guided by God becomes hope. The lesson settled deeply within me. I sensed that my encounter with Jesus was approaching an important turning point. Everything he had shown me was preparing me for what would happen next. Soon, I would return to the world I had left behind. Soon, I would awaken. Soon, I would face the responsibilities waiting for me. But I would not return as the same man, because the seeds of transformation had already been planted. The soldier who entered that experience was not the same leader who would leave it. And although I did not yet know it, my eyes would soon open once again in a hospital room surrounded by people who believed they might never hear my voice again. The next thing I remember was hearing voices. At first, they sounded distant, muffled, almost as though they were coming from the other side of a thick wall. I could not understand the words. I could only sense that people were speaking around me. Slowly, awareness began returning. The peaceful light I had experienced was gone. The extraordinary stillness was gone. The overwhelming sense of timelessness had faded. In its place came the familiar sensations of the physical world. Weight, sound, discomfort, pain. My body felt heavy. Every movement seemed difficult. I tried to open my eyes, but even that required effort. For several moments, everything remained blurry. Shapes moved above me. Lights hung from the ceiling. Voices continued speaking. Then gradually the world came into focus. I found myself lying in a medical treatment room. Several doctors stood nearby. Members of my security team were gathered close to the bed. Some looked exhausted. Others appeared relieved. A few seemed unable to believe what they were seeing. When my eyes finally opened fully, one of the doctors immediately leaned forward. Another called for additional medical staff. The room suddenly became active. Questions filled the air. Instructions were exchanged. Medical equipment was checked. Yet I barely heard any of it, because my thoughts were fixed on something else. Jesus. The encounter felt more real than the room around me. More real than the bed beneath me. More real than the voices surrounding me. For several moments I remained silent. I simply stared upward while trying to understand what had happened. One of the doctors informed me that I had been unconscious for approximately 3 hours. 3 hours. The number surprised me. The experience I had just lived through seemed impossible to measure with ordinary time. It felt both brief and endless, as though moments and eternity had somehow touched each other. The medical team explained that I had suffered injuries from the explosion and impact. My body still carried evidence of what had happened. Pain confirmed that reality. Every movement reminded me that I had survived something serious. Yet despite the physical discomfort, something inside me felt completely different. The anger I had carried seemed quieter. The fear that had often accompanied leadership seemed weaker. The heaviness that had rested upon my heart for years seemed lighter. Not completely gone, but lighter. Significantly lighter. One of the guards standing nearby looked at me with visible emotion. He had been among those protecting me during the attack. I could see the relief in his eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Words seemed unnecessary. Both of us understood how close death had come. Both of us understood how differently that day could have ended. As the hours passed, doctors continued monitoring my condition. Security personnel provided updates regarding the situation outside. Government officials checked on my recovery. The responsibilities of leadership slowly returned. Yet something within me had changed. I noticed it almost immediately. When people entered the room, I viewed them differently. Not dramatically, subtly, but differently. I found myself paying more attention, listening more carefully, looking beyond titles and responsibilities, looking beyond roles and positions, seeing human beings. The lesson Jesus had taught me about the value of every person remained alive within my heart. Over the following days, recovery became my primary responsibility. The body heals according to its own timetable. Rest was necessary. Medical observation was necessary. Patience was necessary. For someone accustomed to constant activity, that was not easy. Yet in many ways, the recovery period became a gift. For the first time in a long while, I had space to reflect deeply, space to think, space to pray, space to examine the experience that had transformed me. I chose not to speak publicly about it. Not immediately. The experience felt too sacred, too personal, too significant to discuss casually. Instead, I carried it quietly. I spent long hours reflecting on every detail, every word Jesus had spoken, every lesson he had revealed, every truth he had exposed within my heart. Again and again, I returned to the scriptures. Passages I had read before now seemed alive in new ways. The words about forgiveness, the words about mercy, the words about loving enemies, the words about overcoming evil with good. I found myself reading them more slowly, thinking about them more deeply, praying through them more sincerely. The experience had not merely changed my emotions, it had changed my perspective. For years, leadership had often felt like a constant struggle against problems. Now I began seeing leadership as something more, an opportunity to serve, an opportunity to encourage, an opportunity to create hope. That shift influenced many small interactions. The way I spoke to people, the way I listened, the way I responded to criticism, the way I handled frustration. Not perfectly, I did not suddenly become flawless. No human being does. But I became more aware, more intentional, more willing to pause before reacting, more willing to seek understanding before judgment. One day during my recovery, I found myself thinking about those who had opposed me. In the past, such thoughts often produced tension. This time, something different happened. I prayed for them, not because I agreed with them, not because I approved of harmful actions, but because Jesus had shown me that carrying hatred only deepens wounds. Prayer began releasing burdens I had carried for years. Gradually, I understood something important. Forgiveness does not erase accountability. Forgiveness does not ignore justice. Forgiveness does not deny truth. Forgiveness simply refuses to allow bitterness to control the future. That lesson became one of the most valuable gifts I received from the experience. As the weeks continued, others noticed changes. Some commented on my patience. Others observed a different tone in conversations. A few asked whether something significant had happened during my recovery. Usually I smiled and offered simple answers. The full story remained private, at least for a time, because I needed to live the lessons before speaking about them. Anyone can describe transformation. Living it is another matter. Every day presented opportunities to practice what Jesus had taught me, to remain silent before reacting, to pray before deciding, to resist acting from emotional impulse, to understand the fears of others, to remember the value of every human being. Some days were easier than others. Some lessons required repetition. Growth rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually, one decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of obedience at a time. Yet throughout that entire period, one truth remained constant. The man who opened his eyes in that treatment room was not the same man who had lost consciousness on the concrete floor. Something fundamental had shifted. Not in my position, not in my title, not in my responsibilities, in my heart. And that change would eventually shape the most important lesson I could share with the world. In the months that followed, I often found myself returning to the lessons Jesus had taught me. Not because life suddenly became easy. It did not. The challenges facing Burkina Faso remained real. Security concerns remained real. Political pressures remained real. Criticism remained real. Leadership continued demanding difficult decisions. The world around me had not changed overnight. What changed was the way I looked at it. That difference proved more powerful than I could have imagined. Before that experience, I often believed that strength alone could solve most problems. If a challenge appeared, we needed determination. If opposition emerged, we needed resolve. If danger threatened, we needed courage. Those qualities remain important. I still believe that. But I now understand they are incomplete without something deeper. Without wisdom, without compassion, without humility, without faith. As I reflected on the encounter with Jesus, I began recognizing truths that had been hidden in plain sight throughout my life. The first truth was simple. Power cannot heal a nation. Power can enforce laws. Power can create order. Power can protect institutions. Power can influence events. But power alone cannot heal hearts. And every lasting transformation begins in the heart. Throughout history, many leaders have possessed tremendous authority. Some ruled vast territories. Some commanded powerful armies. Some controlled enormous wealth. Yet despite all their power, many failed to create lasting peace. Why? Because fear may control behavior for a time, but it cannot create genuine unity. Fear can force people to comply. Fear can silence disagreement. Fear can maintain order temporarily. But fear cannot build trust. Fear cannot create love. Fear cannot inspire hope. Only something greater can do that. Jesus had shown me this clearly. A leader may possess authority, but if people lose hope, authority alone will never be enough. That realization changed how I viewed my responsibilities. The second truth I learned was equally important. Fear cannot unite people. For many years, I had watched how fear influences societies. Fear divides communities. Fear creates suspicion. Fear encourages people to see enemies everywhere. Fear narrows vision. Fear pushes human beings towards survival rather than understanding. When fear becomes dominant, people stop listening. They stop trusting. They stop believing in one another. The result is isolation, division, conflict. I began realizing that one of the greatest responsibilities of leadership is helping people move beyond fear without ignoring reality. That balance is difficult. Leaders cannot pretend dangers do not exist. Leaders cannot ignore threats. Leaders cannot abandon responsibility. But neither can they allow fear to become the foundation of everything they do. Hope must remain stronger than fear. Otherwise, fear eventually becomes the leader. The third lesson may have been the most difficult. Violence cannot create lasting peace. This truth carried special weight because I am a soldier. I understand the realities of conflict. I understand that there are times when force becomes necessary to protect innocent people. I understand the responsibility governments carry regarding security. Jesus was not teaching me to ignore those realities. He was teaching me something deeper. Violence may stop a threat. Violence may win a battle. Violence may create temporary stability. But violence alone cannot heal the wounds that caused conflict in the first place. A nation requires more than security. It requires reconciliation. It requires trust. It requires opportunity. It requires hope. Without those things, peace remains fragile. The lesson challenged me profoundly because it required me to think beyond immediate victories and focus on long-term healing. As these truths settled into my heart, another realization emerged. Mercy and strength are not enemies. Before my experience, I often viewed them as separate qualities. Strength belonged to leaders. Mercy belonged to spiritual teachers. Strength belonged to soldiers. Mercy belonged to pastors. Strength belonged to those who protected. Mercy belonged to those who comforted. Jesus showed me how incomplete that perspective was. True strength includes mercy. Real courage includes compassion. Authentic leadership includes humility. The strongest people I have ever known were not those who inspired the most fear. They were those who remained kind despite having reasons to become bitter. Those who remained patient despite facing frustration. Those who remained hopeful despite disappointment. Those who remained faithful despite hardship. That kind of strength changes lives. It changes families. It changes communities. It changes nation. Another lesson followed closely behind. Forgiveness is not surrender. This truth deserves careful reflection. Many people misunderstand forgiveness. They assume forgiveness means accepting injustice. They assume forgiveness means abandoning accountability. They assume forgiveness means pretending harmful actions never occurred. That is not forgiveness. Forgiveness acknowledges truth. Forgiveness recognizes pain. Forgiveness understands consequences. But forgiveness refuses to allow hatred to become the final chapter. Forgiveness frees the heart from becoming a prisoner of resentment. Jesus helped me understand that hatred often harms the person carrying it more than the person receiving it. Bitterness consumes energy. Bitterness steals peace. Bitterness clouds judgment. Bitterness slowly transforms character. Forgiveness breaks those chains. Not instantly, not easily, but powerfully. As I practiced these lessons, I began noticing changes in my daily life. Small changes at first. The way I responded during tense conversations, the way I handled criticism, the way I approached difficult decisions, the way I viewed people who disagreed with me. The changes were not dramatic. They were gradual, but they were real. And over time, those small changes produced larger ones. I became more willing to listen, more willing to seek understanding, more willing to pray before reacting, more willing to remember that every person carries struggles I cannot see. Those lessons continue shaping me today. I have not mastered them completely. I am still learning, still growing, still depending on God's guidance. But the direction of my heart changed that day, and for that I remain grateful. Sometimes people ask what leadership truly requires. My answer today is different from what it would have been before that experience. Leadership requires courage. Yes. Leadership requires discipline. Certainly. Leadership requires wisdom. Absolutely. But above all, leadership requires a heart that refuses to lose its humanity. Because when leaders stop seeing people, they begin seeing only problems. When leaders stop seeing value, they begin seeing only obstacles. When leaders stop seeing hope, they begin spreading fear. Jesus taught me that leadership is ultimately about serving people, not controlling them. Helping people rise, not merely directing them. Creating hope, not merely managing crises. That lesson changed me. And perhaps that is why I am sharing this story now. Not because I want attention, not because I want admiration, but because someone listening today may be carrying burdens similar to the ones I carried. Perhaps you have been hurt. Perhaps you have been betrayed. Perhaps you feel overwhelmed by responsibilities. Perhaps anger has quietly taken root inside your heart. Perhaps disappointment has become heavier than hope. If that describes you, I want you to know something. Transformation is possible. I know because I experienced it. The day I believed my life was ending became the day a new chapter began. The day I thought death was near became the day I learned how to live differently. The day I expected darkness became the day I encountered light. After everything that happened, I now understand something I once overlooked. A person's greatest victory is not over an enemy. It is over the darkness that attempts to take control of the heart. That is the battle every human being faces. And with God's help, it is a battle that can be won. The encounter I experienced did not remove every challenge from my life. It did not eliminate every problem. It did not create a perfect world. But it gave me something far more valuable. A new understanding of strength. A new understanding of leadership. A new understanding of forgiveness. And above all, a renewed understanding of the love of Jesus Christ. If God could transform the heart of a soldier standing in the middle of conflict, then he can transform any heart. If God could speak peace into a life surrounded by pressure, then he can speak peace into your life as well. If God could bring hope into my darkest moment, then he can bring hope into yours. The day I thought I was about to lose my life became the day my life truly began. And that is the message I leave with you today. After everything I have shared, there is one truth that remains clearer to me than ever before. Power cannot save the human heart. Money cannot save the human heart. Titles cannot save the human heart. Only faith, compassion, humility, and the willingness to walk in God's truth can truly transform a person from the inside out. The world today carries too much pain, too much division, too much anger, too much hatred. We see conflict between nations. We see families breaking apart. We see communities struggling to trust one another. We see people searching for meaning while feeling increasingly alone. My prayer is simple. I pray for Burkina Faso. I pray for Africa. I pray for the people of the United States. And I pray for every person listening to this message, no matter where they live. Let us turn away from what is evil. Let us reject greed, hatred, and bitterness. Let us choose kindness over cruelty. Let us choose forgiveness over revenge. Let us choose hope over despair. Let us choose faith over fear. No matter how difficult life becomes, never lose hope. There is always light beyond the darkness. There is always purpose beyond the pain. There is always mercy available to those who seek it. And there is always hope for those who continue believing. I truly believe that God is with us. He is with Burkina Faso. He is with Africa. He is with the United States. And he is with every person who sincerely seeks truth, peace, and goodness. If this story has touched your heart in any way, I invite you to leave a prayer for someone in need today. Pray for your family. Pray for your nation. Pray for those who are suffering. Pray even for those with whom you disagree. And let us continue spreading hope, faith, and compassion wherever we can. May God bless you. May He guide you. And may His peace remain in your heart always.